Today we're going through the year-end processing in Dynamics SL, and we're going to cover a lot of topics, and we've got a lot of things that we need to go ahead and cover in a short period of time. So bear with me as we go through those things. I'd like also to welcome you all, and good afternoon. And for those of you who may be in the Mountain or Pacific time zones, good morning. Once again, as Melanie said, my name is Jenny Ruck. I have actually been working with payroll for about 15 years, and so I know quite a bit. If you have questions towards the end of the webinar, please go ahead and ask me. Let's go ahead and get started. Our agenda today is to cover the year-end update installation process, W-2 processing, doing the time and expense project closing, and the 1099 processing. Now, our steps for year-end processing, starting with the payroll module, the very first thing is, obviously, to apply the year-end updates. We need to calculate the W-2s. We need to review the data to make sure that it looks okay. And we need to do any editing or corrections if needed. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, I think. And then, of course, printing the W-2 forms. We also need to talk about running magnetic media for the upload to the Social Security Administration if you're doing magnetic media. And we're going to cover that as well today. The first thing we need to do is obtain the year-end updates from Microsoft. Now, everybody's a little bit different as far as how their login is their login to Partner Source or Customer Source. So these are the web addresses that you can use to log into your Customer Source or Partner Source site. And then once you're at this location, this downloads area, then you can do a search for year-end updates 2012, and it's going to go ahead and direct you to the appropriate website to go ahead and download those files. Once we've obtained the year-end updates, we need to install. There's a document that is attached in the zip file that has the instructions for the installation. And that's very important because each installation, each download has the files for every single version within Dynamics SL. And so you need to go ahead and choose the one that is appropriate for your version and then run the installation from there. Now, the installation is actually very easy. It's just an executable that you launch, and it automatically goes ahead and does what it's supposed to do for your version. What it does is it updates the current year reports, any magnetic media changes, both for W-2s or for 1099s, and it also changes any, it also makes any updates to the AP 1099s. So if there's any changes whatsoever, it goes ahead and takes care of those. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this year's year-end updates only affect these versions of Microsoft Dynamics SL. So you have to be on either 7.0 Service Pack 3, 7.0 Service Pack 4. You have to be on Dynamics SL 2011, 2011 Service Pack 1, or 2011 Feature Pack 1. There is nothing supported by Microsoft at this point for year-end updates prior to those versions. If you're on SP2, SP1 for 7.0, if you're on 6.5, if you're on 6.0, you need to upgrade. Otherwise, these changes will not take effect for you. Now, with that being said, moving on, once the installation is completed, we're going to do the calculation of W-2s. And what we need to do is we need to open up the W-2 calculation screen. We choose the current W-2 year, and I'll have a screenshot here in just a little bit here. we select the pay groups. Oh, hide that there. We need to select the pay groups that you want to calculate the W-2s for. This is actually very similar to the regular payroll calculation in that you have to select the pay groups when you're doing regular payroll calculation. Now we have to do the same thing for calculating W-2s. If we want to, we can do them in sections, and that's what that pay group selection is for. And then hit Begin Processing. As you can see here, over on the left-hand side, there's those pay groups. That's where we make those selections for the pay groups. Everyone that we select over here, you see the selected field down at the bottom that's marked as an X. That means that those are the people that we're calculating the W-2s for. Now, when we're reviewing the data, there's a couple of different ways to review data. First, you can print the W-2 forms to blank paper in order to review the totals for each employee. You can use the plain paper copy formats to print the boxes around the calculated figures, and that way you can actually kind of see what the W-2s are going to look like on the printed forms. So if you do need to do any review or checking of numbers or that sort of thing, you can use that plain paper copy, and it will put all of those boxes around it. It makes it a little bit easier to read. The other thing that you can do is you can use the Employee W-2 History screen within Solomon Dynamics SL. You can go ahead and use that screen to verify individual employees. So you can actually bring up individual employees in that screen and then go ahead and look at what totals have appeared after that calculation process has occurred. Now, if you do need to do any correcting of W-2s, all right, let's say that you find a number that is incorrect. One of the most common issues that I run into on support calls is folks are saying that federal and state wages don't match up quite right. And there are a number of reasons for this, but the very first thing that we have to do is we have to determine the cause of the problem. We can't just go ahead and edit information just because it doesn't look right to us. We need to identify what it is that caused the problem to begin with so that we can troubleshoot it and make sure that it's correct for next year. And we also don't want to do anything that's going to make anyone unhappy. Again, Fed wages incorrect. That's one of the things that I run into every year end. The first thing that we need to do is identify, are there any earnings types that are set up incorrectly? Are there earnings types that are set up that have certain taxes or don't have certain taxes associated with them? If there are any exemptions that are missing or not included. And then all we have to do for the federal taxes, or the federal wages, I should say, is to fix that setup and recalculate W-2s to correct. Dynamics SL has a provision in place regarding federal wages that once we've made that correction, we can recalculate, and it's automatically going to do adjustments. Now, we don't have that same luxury with state. If the state wages are incorrect, again, we need to identify what it is that caused the problem. Were there earnings types that are set up incorrectly? Were there exemptions that were not set up correctly? And then we need to use our initialize mode to correct the earnings subject to deduction. And as you can see from the PowerPoint, I say correct the wages. It's the earnings subject to deduction against that state wage code. And once we've fixed that, we can recalculate the W-2s, and they will come out correctly. Now, if there are tax amounts that are incorrect, we definitely have to be sure that we take very special care in this. if there's a tax amount that's incorrect, again, we have to determine the cause of the problem before we go any farther. Also, we have to initialize the tax amount to be the correct tax amount. But when I say that very first bullet point there about determining the cause of the problem, we have to make sure that before we initialize any tax amount, we need to make sure that it's something that, number one, you've paid into whatever taxing authority is in question, and we have to make sure that your general ledger entries have been booked appropriately. But if we've determined that the correct amount has been taxed, then we can go ahead and use initialize mode to initialize that tax amount in the employee history screen. Once we've done that, recalculating W-2s will pick that amount up, and we will be good to go. But again, I have to stress that. This is very important. I have run into this too many times, and it's been a very big pain point for many clients that someone has gone ahead and made changes to these tax amounts without really understanding why or what it is that they were doing, and we've had to do some database repairs to go ahead and fix it. So very important that you don't make any initialization changes until you know for 100% certain what it is that you're correcting and why. And I've got this here on my important notes. We should not initialize any totals unless we know why we're doing it. And the biggest reason that we want to go ahead and find out why it is that whatever it is happened is to make sure that we avoid problems in the following year. You know, if you run into a setup issue this year, we want to make sure that it doesn't happen again next year. Now, when you're printing the W-2s, you use the report format, W-2 forms, in the report section of Dynamics SL in order to go ahead and print those. You can obtain pre-printed forms from Solomon Forms, and the website is attached here. It's www.microsoftbusinesschecks.com, and you can actually do a search specifically for W-2 forms, and you can isolate it down to Dynamics SL forms, and their forms are guaranteed 100% to fit with every single Crystal report within Dynamics SL. You can also print your own forms. If you've got blank forms available, you can print those using the copy A, copy B, copy C, and copy D formats. And basically what you do is go ahead and when you're in that W-2 forms, there is a drop-down box for different formats, and that copy A, copy B, copy C, copy D, those are all going to show up in the screen that you can choose. Now there's something important to know regarding the copy A. The copy A is the one that is designed for the Social Security Administration. They must be printed in a red, scannable 2UP format ink. So if you don't have that kind of ink, then just printing them to paper is not going to work for you for that copy A for Social Security. You have to go out and get a special ink in order for SSI to read that form. But all other forms, perfectly fine. The IRS does not have any problem if you give copy B, copy C, and copy D to your employees or file them or what have you. Nobody has a problem with that. It's just that red one, the Social Security one. All right, so with that being said, running the magnetic media file. In order to run the magnetic media file, if you're required to file magnetic media, you use the W-2 magnetic media screen in payroll. And there are certain fields that are required for you to populate. Otherwise, it's not going to let you go farther. You need to put in the correct calendar year. You can change the path very easily. And actually, I do want to check and see if this will work here. Oh. My apologies, I'm in the wrong screen. There we go. This is not my most recent copy of Solomon. And Melanie, can you confirm? Can you see my Solomon here?
Yes, Jenny.
All right, great. Ooh. All right, like I said, this is not my most recent copy of Solomon, but I wanted to make sure that everyone could see the screen. If I come here to payroll and I go to this generate W-2 electronic file, that's the screen that we're looking for. Oh. All right, may not have been my best idea. I apologize, folks. All right, and what I was trying to demonstrate to you and what I wanted to show you is that there's information that actually comes directly from the IRS. The PIN number right here, this is going to be required, and it comes from a letter that you guys get directly from the Social Security Administration. They give you that and instructions on where to upload your file to. The other piece of information that is required is this contact person information right here. As you can see, it's outlined in red and it's currently blank. You have to fill that out every time you try to run this process. And basically what you're giving them is the person that needs to be contacted if there are any problems. You need to give them a phone number and you need to give them a name. And you can actually choose a notification method, whether or not you want them to notify you via email or
Jenny,
postal service.
Jenny, can I interrupt? I'm sorry. Some yes, viewers are having difficulty seeing the screen. Can you maybe try minimizing it and pulling it back up?
Oh yeah, I can try.
We see the SL menu, but the screen itself is not displaying.
What if I move it? Does this work?
It's still just showing the SL menu.
Okay, that's all right. So I can try minimizing that, minimizing that.
You can see the PowerPoint now.
All right, that's
the
good.
SL menu.
All right, so that's a start. And let me see if I can get this back up.
So you're clicking the screen. There we go. Now it's open.
All right, so now you see it?
Yes,
okay,
thank
great.
you.
So to repeat what I was saying, here under the transmitter tab, this is where that PIN number goes. This is what I was telling you. You guys get from the SSI directly. This is not something Solomon generated. It's something directly from the IRS. And then the contact person info, this tab right here, that's where you would put in the contact name, phone number, and then here's that notification method that I was mentioning to you. that way what happens is that when you generate that electronic W-2 file, it's going to go ahead and send a file, and there are certain codes that get embedded in that file that say, this is the person to contact if you run into problems, and this is the way that they want you to contact them. Those all get embedded in that file. All right, so let me go ahead and bring up the PowerPoint again. All right, so we use that W-2 magnetic media screen in payroll. Those are the required fields. There's the calendar year. You can change the file path anywhere that you want to save it wherever you like. That PIN number, which we just talked about, and contact person information. Those are things that are important in order to make sure that this file gets generated correctly. Now, all of the company information fields, they all default from your company maintenance screen within Dynamics SL. They can be overridden if they need to be, but honestly, if your companies are set up the way that they're supposed to be, there should be no reason to do so. Sending the file to the Social Security Administration. That letter that's going to send you the PIN number, that's also going to give you instructions on exactly what web address you need to log into, what your login information is, all of that information. And those will all be provided by the Social Security Administration for W-2 transmittal. Now, if you want to double check your file to make sure that it's going to be accepted by the SSA, you can use an AccuAge program, and I believe if I click here again, there we go. There is a website that you can download that AccuAge program from. It's a free program that the Social Security Administration provides to everyone in order to run those W-2 files through and make sure that they're going to be accepted by the Social Security Administration. If you run into a situation where you've got an error message when you run it through AccuAge, you definitely want to double check with support, because one of two things has occurred. Number one, you don't have the most current year-end updates available, and so your file is not being read, or there's some sort of a defect or bug, and we need to be made aware of that. Now, let's move on to closing payroll. In order to close the payroll module, you have to open up the General Ledger module, and you go to the closing screen, just like you would for accounts payable, accounts receivable, General Ledger, etc. There's that closing screen. The December period will always be closed using closing type of year. Now, in payroll, that's a little bit different than you're going to find from any other module. If you're on a fiscal year, let's say that you're running in, let's say that you're running on a year that ends in September. Even though you ended in September, your payroll is still going to be closed for the year in December, even though that might be your third period of your new fiscal year. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Payroll always closes for the year at the end of the year. Closing is going to cycle the payroll over to calendar year 2013. Your fiscal periods will still remain on a fiscal period posting schedule if you're not on a calendar year. And closing is going to create the deductions and history records for 2013, allowing all new checks to be created. And I think this is a very big key point right here. You must close payroll before you can calculate for 2013. So come December 31, if you haven't closed payroll and you're starting to run checks in January, on January 1, you have to have made sure that payroll is closed for the year. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to calculate checks. You're going to get an error message. Okay? And here's a screenshot of an example of the closing screen. This one actually is showing you that even though our current fiscal period is 03, we are closing for the year for payroll. That will move payroll into fiscal period 4, but it will move it into calendar year 2003. Or, I'm sorry, 2013. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and move on into how to close Project Controller. And then after this, we're going to talk about the 1099. So bear with me for those of you who may or may not be using Project Controller. All right. First and foremost, the project system must be closed at the end of each fiscal period. It has to happen. You can close for any fiscal period, or you can do the year end. And the screen is actually going to change a little bit depending on where you are within your accounting period system. It's done in the close period screen in Project Controller. Before it will close, it does a series of control tests to make sure that it can be closed. First, it checks to make sure that all the submodules have been posted. So it looks at AP, AR, all of those other places and says, okay, has everything that's got a project ID associated with it posted and been sent over to project. It also says, are there any project charge batches that are not posted? It blocks it. You cannot close. It gives you an error message if those conditions have not been met. It also reviews time cards in time and expense, and this is very important for anybody who's doing payroll and using time and expense. It looks at those time cards, it reviews them, and generates a warning message if there are any unposted items being carried forward. Now here is the close period screen in Project. Now as you can see from the button that is displayed on the screen, this is saying begin year-end close because it knows that it's doing a year-end close. Normally when you see this screen, you're going to see a button that says begin period close. Dynamics SL is smart enough to know, especially on the project side, it's smart enough to know whether or not you're trying to close the period or trying to close the year. So when you open this screen, you're going to see this button change whether if it's a period close versus it's a year-end close. So we just wanted to display that for you. We have some more information for you here. If it detects that the current period is also the last period of the fiscal year, and this is kind of a reiteration of what I just mentioned, the title of the begin processing changes to begin year-end close versus close period. So, like I said, it's smart enough to know, and it goes ahead and takes that step. So, if a year-end close takes place, though, now many of you who may be using Project, you've got some projects that are balance forward projects, and some that maybe are not. If the year-end close process takes place, balance forward amounts are calculated for those projects, and they move it to the new year. Now, with that in mind, and actually maybe I'm kind of stepping ahead of myself here. All right, prior to closing, you want to review any project maintenance records for any open projects. If you have projects that should have their balances carried forward, we should have the balance forward at year-end option selected on that project in project maintenance, because what it does is it determines whether or not it's going to go ahead and cycle that balance forward. And any projects that span multiple fiscal years need to have that checked so that the ending balance is rolled forward to the next year. Any annual projects or anything that's going to be rebudgeted, then the checkbox should be cleared. That way you can go ahead and rearrange what it is that you want to do or reset up the project so that it makes more sense for you on an annual basis. There we go. This is the one I was thinking of. If the year is closed and some projects were not marked as balance forward, the balances can be corrected. All we have to do is change the current period in PC setup, and we can type that in manually right there in the setup screen, and then mark the balance forward option and run the closing process again for Project Controller only. Project Controller is one of the only modules that you can actually do stuff like this to, and basically reverse an accidental closing or an accidental moving forward when there was something not set up correctly. All right. Now, there is an item within Project Controller, the fiscal period maintenance. Now, it's not really used for a lot of things. In fact, I will tell you, our demo database really doesn't have anything in it for it, but I do know that it's used for certain things like allocations. There are places that this gets set up that you can actually use that fiscal period setup to run additional reporting or to, what's the word I'm looking for? Shrink down certain items where you can actually make payments and project, pardon me, project entries and stuff like that specific to a period number. And if you're using that fiscal period maintenance to set up the fiscal periods, you have to make sure that you've got the new ones in for the new year. Like I said, again, not a lot of folks are using it, but it is kind of a narrower downer, I guess, for lack of a better way of describing it. It's a way to narrow things down, and some folks are using it. If you are one of those folks, you need to make sure that you set up the fiscal period maintenance to make sure that 2013's periods are all set up. The other thing that you have to do, especially if you're using time and expense with payroll, is you need to review your week maintenance and make sure that your new week ending dates are set up for 2013. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is you're going to go into time and expense and you're going to set up a timesheet for an employee, and it's going to tell you that it can't find the week ending date. Those week ending dates have to be there. It's very important. All right, we're going to move on to the AP 1099 processing real quick here. All right, the 1099 update, the 1099 information is updated throughout the year. So every time that you enter a voucher that has 1099 information associated with it, it's automatically going to update your accounts payable vendors with that information. There's no extra process required. Unlike W-2s and things over on the payroll side, we don't have to run a calculation process or anything like that. These things are automatically recorded to the vendor right off the bat. The only time we need to run any kind of process is if we're running we're generating the magnetic media to send to the IRS. If you're printing the 1099s, you go into reports, you click the 1099 forms report. You can do a preview. There's a 1099 preview report, or you can go ahead and print the 1099s to blank paper. Now, one thing that is important to know is that the 1099 preview shows all 1099 vendors, even if they have not gone over the limit. So it's going to show you everybody. And if I recall correctly, and don't quote me on this, please, I believe the limit this year is like $550, which means that if you've got a vendor who had $400 that was 1099 reportable, you're still going to see them on the preview report. Now, you will not see them on the 1099 report. So if you want to print the 1099s to blank paper in order to review, that makes sense as well. And then that way, at least you'll be excluding any vendors that are not required to get a 1099. Now, 2 years can be open at any given time for 1099s. What we typically do is we leave the prior year open and the current year open. So in descriptive terms, come December 31st, what I would do is I would close my 1099 year, but I would have, basically what it would be is that I would have 2012 as my current year and 2013 as my next year. So it's a little bit confusing sometimes, but it leaves both of them open. That way if I have to void any checks or do anything else to 2012, that year is still available, but I can also still print checks for 2013. And I think this slide kind of explains that, but I think I explained it just a little bit better. All right, yep. Typically leave the prior year open and the current year open. And for this year, that would mean current year displays as 2012, and next year is 2013. And that will allow us to go ahead and void checks from prior year and still enter checks for current year. Printing 1099s for 2012 would then be defaulted. So basically what that means, and here actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and stop the show for a minute. All right, and Melanie, can you go ahead and verify that you're seeing Solomon?
I do see the menu.
All right, great. All right, so in Dynamics FL,
I don't see a screen.
I'm sorry, what?
Is there a screen open yet or no?
Well, do you see the menu?
Just the menu, yes. That's all I see right now.
All right, great. Yep, that's
Okay.
exactly what I'm looking for. All right. So what I'm talking about here is that oh, bear with me a second. All right, I'm actually trying to pull up the 1099 forms for a minute. Okay, can you see the 1099 forms
Yes.
screen? All right, great. Now, everyone, here is what I'm talking about. Here under this Options tab If you're doing the current year, that would, based on the information that I've just given you, that would be last year. So that would be my 2012. But if I want to look at 2013, I can check mark this box right here, and that's going to show me, or I'm sorry, pardon me. If I print it without this checkbox, that's going to be my 2012. If I check mark this box, that's going to be my 2013. Oh, I hope I didn't confuse anyone with that. All right, so I'm going back to the slideshow. And Melanie, again, please confirm for me that it is
Looks
appearing
great
on the screen. Great. Ah, there we go. I actually had a screenshot of that, and I forgot that I put it in there. All right, and that's just confirmation that if you click that Options tab when you're doing the printing, that's telling the system what it is that you want to print. All right, now the 1099 year closing, and this is kind of an important thing. There's a 1099 year calendar control screen that you can go into that will purge the oldest year and cycle your current and your next into the new years. Now, keep in mind, when you run this process, it gets rid of all of the information for any open year, or for the previous open year that you have. So let's say, for example, that you got information in 2011 and you have information in 2012. And if we run this process and choose that process option of purge oldest year, and we cycle it to basically where it looks right now, it's going to remove everything from 2011. You will not be able to get it back. There is no history. Dynamics SL only holds history for 1099 information for 2 years. That's it. So once you've cycled this through, it's gone. Now, there are ways for us to do database repairs and get it back, but it's not necessarily the way that you want to do it. So you don't want to cycle that through extra times by accident. Keep an eye on those calendar year dates, the current and the next. And again, that's where we're kind of talking about that. Usually we leave current 1099 year as last year and next 1099 year as this year. So when you're closing into 2013, honestly, this is how I would expect your screen to look. And that way you've still got 2012 information held on to in case you have to reprint something or in case you have to resend something. And then you've also got 2013 for the new year. Now, with that being said, I'm moving to the slide that actually explains all that. And that's what I get for doing talking points on screenshots. But yes, when you're ready to close the year, you change the option to purge oldest year, and then you hit begin processing. And once again, it gets rid of that first year information, cycles all the vendors to the next year, leaving the new year open. And again, in my example, 2011 will go away, 2012 will remain, and 2013 will be open for new information. All right, now let's talk about changing 1099 information. Much like payroll, and I know I'm quoting the slide, but I cannot say this enough. much like payroll, we should not initialize any totals unless we know why we're doing it. Because otherwise, you're going to spend time initializing totals all day long, and for why? I mean, the system should be doing all of its calculations for you, okay? So do not initialize anything unless you know why you're doing it. We don't want to get the IRS or the auditors angry, and if there's a setup issue that caused the problem, we want to make sure that it gets fixed. If you can't trust the information that Dynamics SL is put in the system, then, you know, we need to make sure that you can. However, in the event that you do need to do any editing, you can go into initialize mode and correct the 1099 totals on a vendor-by-vendor basis. You do need to have initialized access rights to the vendor maintenance screen to do it. If you do, these fields, and I hope you can see my, oh, I may have to back up. One second. There we go. If you do, these fields down here will be enabled, and you can edit any information that you need to. But again, I want to make sure that everyone is aware, do not initialize these totals unless you know why you're doing it. Okay? Examples of reasons to initialize totals. I entered a voucher. I forgot to mark it as a 1099 voucher. It was for $500, and now his 1099 is $500 short. Got it. Okay. We understand that. But if it's wrong for any other reason, we have to go ahead and troubleshoot that and make sure that it's right. You do not want to get yourself in trouble with the IRS because of initializations that didn't make sense. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have initialization mode access to the screen, you can make that change, and all changes will be immediately picked up by the report. And all changes will be immediately picked up by the 1099 magnetic media process. Now, as far as the magnetic media is concerned, that is done in the Generate 1099 electronic file screen. You can generate for either of the 2 years open, but most people obviously do that for the current year. There are some fields required, and I actually use the word the word PIN here, and it's really a control code. Now, that is supposed to be sent to you as well. If you are required to send 1099s via magnetic media, you're going to get a letter from the government, and it's going to give you your control code. But the two fields that are required are that control code and contact information. And the reason the contact information is required is because if they have any problem whatsoever with the file, they need to know who to call or who to contact in order to sort it out. Now here's the Generate 1099 electronic file screen. It looks a lot like the W-2 one. Up at the top here, you can see where you can choose that calendar year. And down here at the bottom, the output path, that's where you can choose where you want the file to go. Here is the spot that I was talking about where there's these required information fields. This control code right here, that's that, oh, sorry, I clicked, bear with me. This control code up at the top, That's the one that they're going to give you. That's your control code. That's how they know that when you send this file, who it is that you are as a company. And then it also needs this contact name right here. And it needs a contact phone number and extension. It does not require a contact email address, but you can definitely put one in if you'd like. Unlike the W-2s, it doesn't actually give you a space where you can say, I would like to be contacted via this method. But 1099s, they do give you the fields available to give them information. All right, that control code, it comes from a letter from the IRS, which we already talked about. You add the contact info in case they have any questions. And most of the other information, and the reason we didn't touch on a lot of it, is because it comes directly from your company maintenance record. It can be changed if it needs to be. But double check it to make sure that it's correct before you hit begin processing on that screen. Otherwise, it should already default based on the company. All right. Now, with that said, I would like to go ahead and open it up for any questions. And I would like to go ahead and make sure that everyone knows about the MS Dynamics events at gmail.com address in case there are any questions that I can't answer at this point. Melanie?
Thank you, Jenny. At this point, as Jenny said, we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. And as a reminder, you can submit those using the questions pane on the GoToWebinar console. If there's any questions that arise after the webinar, feel free to send those to the email address that Jenny mentioned on the screen, and we can always follow up with you via email as well. Jenny, it looks like we got a question here. I'll go ahead and read to you. It reads, we always have issues with recurring GL batches. It considers them unposted and it won't close. Has this been fixed?
Okay, that actually, you know what, actually, that sounds more like a support question. I don't know that that is a year-end question per se. If you don't mind, what it sounds to me just off the bat is that it sounds to me like these are recurring or regenerating batches, and I think that the support team would need to look into those. Because I don't know why those would just kind of stay out there. Melanie, can you go ahead and get that person's information, and either myself or someone else on the support team can maybe take a look at this for them?
Definitely.
All right. Yeah. Again, I don't believe that this is a year-end question. It sounds more like a support question.
Okay, fair enough. We've got another one here, and it reads, is there a recommended method for recording group term insurance excess premiums in payroll?
Oh, now, I guess I would probably need a little bit more information. Am I assuming, I am making an assumption here that we're talking about it like a group term life, and it's something that is not paid by the employee, but I would have to confirm that. There are definite ways of setting this up. If it's an employer-paid deduction or an employer-paid amount, we can set up an earnings type that does not contribute to net pay to go ahead and include those, and then we can tax them even appropriately. If it's an an employee-paid piece of information, there are ways that we can do that on a deduction level. So, yeah, I mean, that one I think we would need a little bit more information on as well. Melanie, again, because of the, for the sake of time, can you get that person's information? I will be happy to answer that question, but I need to do so at a later time.
Most certainly, I can do that for them as well.
Great.
All right, great questions coming in. Feel free to keep
wonderful
submitting
questions,
those.
actually. But not quite within the scope of the year-end updates.
Not sure if this clarifies anything for you, if it's still a follow-up, but I got additional clarification. It says, yes, it is the excess of premiums over $50,000 paid by employer.
Okay, all right, yeah, so it sounds like an employer-paid earnings type. We need to go ahead and make sure that the employee gets additional monies added to their year-to-date wages, because it's a benefit that they're getting, and it's a taxable benefit, but the employer is paying it for their behalf. It is what it sounds like. So, yes, actually, go ahead and actually direct that person's question to me.
Okay.
I will answer that separate.
Okay.
Yep.
We have another follow-up on the initial question with the recurring batches, it looks like. She says, we've contacted support, and the answer was to change the project controller setup screen to remove the GL from the list to override, and then close project controller for the year end and revert the setup screen back. Haven't contacted support for a few years, just wanted to know if that was fixed. I will contact them again this year if it still happens. And I know we do also have Stacy, our project controller panelist. I don't know if she's got any input on that either. If so, Stacy, please speak up.
I'm not aware of any project setup or project closing issues that would prevent GL recurring batches from releasing and posting. Do you know what version that they're on?
We can clarify. If you would, please provide the version, if you would. And as we wait for that, I have had a few requests for the PowerPoint slide deck, and while they're not available for direct download, if you would like to send an email to the email address on the screen and just request a copy of the slide deck, we can provide that to you. We do also record the webinars, so if all goes as planned with the recording, we will have the recording available on the Dynamics Downloads channel out on YouTube for viewing. So.
Well, while we're waiting for the project info, Melanie, is there any other payroll-related questions?
I did just have another one pop in here. It says, what box on W-2 is populated with the new requirement of employee benefit contributions?
Oh, all right. Well, you've got me a little flabbergasted because I did not know about that new box. I will have to double check that. Is that something that maybe can be sent to the Dynamics Downloads email so that I can address it separately?
Yeah, I'll have their contact information. We can follow up on that one.
All right, great. Yeah, because I would have to double check that. I don't know off the top of my head.
We've had a comment just from an attendee that says the box 12 code DD, if that's helpful, but we can definitely follow up as well on the question. Following up on the recurring batches.
Wait a minute. Hold on. You said, what was that question? What was that comment?
They've answered box 12 code DD. Some of the attendees have responded, answering what box on the W-2 is populated with the new requirement of employee benefit contributions.
All right. Now, as far as box DD is concerned, that was something that actually went into place, as I recall, from last year. And so if you are not seeing a box DD appearing on your deduction maintenance screen, it means that you do not have the most recent tax updates. Because as soon as you apply those updates, that box DD appears, and you can assign a deduction or an earnings code, as you require, to that box DD. Yep, I actually ran into this a lot last year as well. So.
All right. Thank you, Jenny.
You're welcome. And again, please, by all means, go ahead and direct those to the Dynamics Downloads website. Forward those to me as appropriate, and I will go ahead and make sure that everyone's got the appropriate installation files and download files, and that they've got the correct year-end updates installed. But yeah, I mean that DD box that showed up. That one showed up starting last year. So yep.
Thank you.
On the project question and the recurring entries in GL, I'm not seeing any reported or known issues out there for that. I'm not familiar with it. But if they want to submit the details, I could always test it and see if it's still occurring in the current version.
Okay. Yeah, she just commented they're currently upgrading to SL 2011 Feature Pack 1, but that it wasn't prohibiting the recurring batches from processing, but prohibiting being able to close the project controller for the year end.
Oh, yeah, no, I haven't encountered that at all, but I can definitely test that.
Okay. If that's something you'd like us to follow up on, feel free.
Yeah, and I've not run into that either, so.
Great questions. I don't see anything else just at the moment. If there are anything else, please feel free to submit those. I know we've kind of wrapped up the hour, but if there's anything else, we would be glad to answer those for you before we end the webinar. All right. Well, I don't see anything else coming in here. I thank you, Jenny, for presenting, and Stacy for assisting with the questions, and all the attendees for taking time out of your day to attend our Dynamics Downloads webinar. As I mentioned, the session was recorded, and we hope to have it available for viewing in the near future on the Dynamics Downloads channel on YouTube. Our next Dynamics Downloads webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, December 12th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will cover how to do physical inventory in Dynamics SL. So we look forward to having you for that. Thanks again, everyone.